watching with 5 likes. Thank you so much for hitting that like button on the way into the live stream. By hitting that like button, the YouTube algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to join in. This is going to be a video talking about the tariffs on Canadian lumber and the impact that it's going to have coming into the future. There are so much misunderstandings, confusion, I don't know, messed up beliefs out there. I just don't even know how quite to describe it anymore. But the idea that there is going to be this impact on lumber prices due to the Canadian, or due to the tariffs that are going to be put on Canadian lumber, seems to have people's minds just spinning out of control on what that's going to do. There's even this prediction that I'm reading from some lumber outfit, I think over on the East Coast, talking about a 2x4 premium stud that sells for $6, running up to over $10 to $12 if I got it right in the article, after these tariffs are implemented. And I think to myself, no, that is completely inaccurate. That is not right. The belief that there's all of a sudden going to be this huge increase in the cost of lumber and the lumber prices because of a 25% tariff on Canadian lumber is absolutely asinine. It is a very naive way of looking at it. Now, you only have to go back just a few months to realize that there was a huge tariff on Canadian lumber just 6 months ago, 7 months ago. Right? 14% tariff on Canadian lumber, nobody noticed. Not a single person said anything. I mean, there was a bunch of complaining that was done because it was a Biden administration that was doing it, even though this was a carrying on of the Trump administration's tariffs on lumber, but nobody cared. Nobody cared. All of a sudden, it's blasted all over the news, the potential for a tariff going into the future, and it's got everybody's minds lost. They have no idea what the hell to do. And with this idea that there's all of a sudden going to be this huge increase on the cost of lumber because of this tariff, takes no consideration whatsoever that we just had a huge tariff on lumber that didn't do anything. Why didn't everybody go say, hey man, you know, a few months ago we had this huge 14% tariff on lumber, and it hardly did anything to anything when it comes to the lumber industry. And yet here somehow a promise of a cut, or a promise of a 25% impact to Canadian lumber is all of a sudden going to be like this massive drive into lumber prices, causing them to go way up. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, to anybody who's been following the lumber industry for any length of time, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, I guess if you're brand new to the idea, and brand new to the idea of tariffs and what it is that's going to do to lumber, considering that you haven't been following the lumber industry as deeply as I have, maybe then, yeah, okay, I could see where you might have this, you know, belief that a 25% tariff on Canadian lumber would logically cause the prices to go up. But if you go back in history, that didn't happen. Right? It didn't happen at all that way. So I find it very interesting that all these people are going to say how much it's going to destroy the housing market, how much it's going to cause the housing market to go up, or how much it's going to cause lumber prices to go up, and yet they have absolutely no evidence of that taking place in the past when we had tariffs. Just saying. I mean, I follow it pretty close. See, the United States produces a lot of lumber. I don't know how many people realize this, but we produce the most lumber that we consume is produced right here in the United States. Yes, a vast amounts of it comes from Canada. They subsidize their lumber and they dump cheap lumber into the United States. The whole point of the tariffs was to prevent, or to deal with, the anti-dumping issues that were being placed on the transfer coming into the United States. They were saying, hey, you subsidize this lumber, it's too cheap, our mills are not competitive. Because you subsidize that lumber, we are going to hit you with the tariff, so that you don't dump all this subsidized cheap lumber into the United States. That was the point of the tariffs back then. And so when you think about how little is actually being produced in this country, considering that the mills have been in massive curtailments for months, if not going on years now, there is very little inventory that can be had here in the United States. These mills are itching, just itching to ramp up production. You give them any reason why the lumber futures would go up in price, they will be pumping out the material. This whole idea that we are subject to high lumber prices simply because Canada is going to have a 25% tariff put on their lumber makes zero sense to me. And I mean, you could say it, and you could say it outright, and logically it makes sense. But when I go back and I think about some of the things that we have experienced here within the lumber industry, being in the lumber retail space myself, living in the Pacific Northwest, knowing all the distribution networks and supply chains, a 25% tariff on Canadian lumber does not mean that it's going to go causing a 2x4 8 going from $6 to all of a sudden it's going to be over $10 or $12. No, it's not going to go down like that at all. And so as I look at the mainstream media and the propaganda that's being spread about this, I can see how it gets people into a panic. It makes them feel like they have no other choice, as if this is going to be inflicted upon them with absolutely no ability to combat the situation whatsoever. Suck it up and take it. This is not the case. Okay? The credible threat behind it is real. Don't get me wrong. The credible threat is real. The impact from that threat, I think, is very, very mild comparatively to what a lot of people out there feel. Is it going to have an impact? Absolutely. Right? It's going to have an impact. But is it going to be devastating to the point that a lot of these people seem to think out there? Absolutely not. Even if it was half of what people would say that it would be, right? We would have had some sort of impact from it, considering the tariffs that were implemented on lumber over the last 6 months or even the last few years, going all the way back to the Trump administration. And even really, if you want to study it, it goes on way before that. Tariffs on Canadian lumber has been a long-standing tradition between the two countries, between the United States and Canada. This isn't new. None of this is. And as people are learning it for the first time, it feels new. And then they think, oh God, what are we going to do? This is an extreme thing that's taken place, when it's not. What's going to destroy the housing market is the fact that the builders don't build massive amounts of homes. That will destroy the housing market, one way or the other. Whether it's unavailability or it's the fact that the housing market has been destroyed from the inability to actually function within it. What I guess I'm meaning is that the crash in the housing market is the lack of sales. That's the crashing housing market. People want to look at it and say, no, it's prices. Prices is the crashing housing market. That's absolutely incorrect. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's the lack of sales that's crashing. And that is the major problem that we are now facing. If you had buyers in the market in a reasonable way of saying, hey, to the builders, these guys are going to be here when you build this house. That's not taking place right now. The buyers are backing away. They're saying, man, it's too expensive, it's too questionable on interest rates, or just can't afford it, whatever, right? There's all these excuses out there. And as long as the buyers are not stepping up, the builders aren't going to either. So when we see that the buyers are coming back, however that is to take place, if it takes place, the builders will want to step up and provide homes to those buyers. Right now, they have to come up with all kinds of incentives and, some way to attract the buyers into those houses. And that's not a comfortable position for a lot of these builders to be in. They want to be in a position in which that once they build this house, there's going to be buyers coming to take a look at it to purchase that home. When that takes place, they will ramp up production, guaranteed. They want to build. They don't not want to build. Not building means they're not working. They want to work. They want to build. But they also want to build something that's going to sell and not have to discount, not have to figure out incentives to bring the buyers to the market. So once the buyers are back, the builders will be too. And when they come in, they are going to ramp up production. They are going to demand that lumber, and the prices will explode. That is going to be the case. That is going to be the trigger. Everybody says, oh man, these tariffs on Canadian lumber is going to send them up to $10 for a 2x4 8 or something like that. What? That doesn't make any sense. You can't prove that from anything in history. Anytime we have ever had a tariff on Canadian lumber, that was not the case. When lumber ran up as high as it did, it was due to an inelastic demand meeting an inventory depletion. It wasn't from the Canadian tariffs. It came from a massive curtailment that had taken place due to a crashing price. At the end of 2018, lumber futures were at $650 per thousand. They dropped all the way down into the 300s. Mills shut down all over the country, all over Canada. That sent the inventories into a deep, deep recession. People don't even realize how little inventory that actually existed inside of the market at the end of 2019. I was reporting on it constantly on my channel. You can go back and look at my videos. I was reporting on it every other day, at least a couple of times a week. I did a video talk at the end of 2019. I think it was actually in December, November, December of 2019, talking about the OSB production that was going to pull hundreds of billions of square feet of OSB production off the market. That was at the end of 2019. So we wonder why it is that sheathing ran up to $80 a sheet. See, people want to say it was manipulation due to the COVID era. No, it started way before that. It started way before that. Do you think the plans to shut down that OSB manufacturer happened in the month of December or in that 2019? At the end of, no, it was planned way ahead of that. They knew that there was far too much production taking place and it was driving the prices down. They just could no longer operate. They just knew it. They had to shut it down. Now we have an OSB manufacturer in Texas that is going to be like one of the biggest manufacturers ever. Why would lumber prices go up? It doesn't make any sense. The only reason why it would go up is from demand. It's going to come from builders' demand, period. That's it. I don't care what anybody else says. I don't care about these tariffs. I mean, I care about them, but I don't see any evidence of a 25% tariff on Canadian lumber driving the prices up to the all-time highs. Considering that we've had tariffs on Canadian lumber many, many, many times in the past. All right. Okay, moving on. Yes, the energy the U.S. gets from Canada is inelastic. Somebody went long lumber at the bottom. I don't know who that would be. Actually, I think the energy is elastic. Sometimes it is surplus, sometimes it is deficit. Right now, BC is a net importer of electricity, for example. Let's see here. You just contradicted yourself. In what way? Oh no, you have no clue. The imports are extremely important. The U.S. refining in the Midwest, heavy crude is not what the U.S. produces, fracking oil. We're in Texas going to get forest products for OSB. Where is Texas going to get forest products for OSB? Are you kidding? There is I'm sorry, I don't mean to, that's a legitimate question, but right now there is a huge, huge surplus, an abundance of pine trees in the southern part of the United States. In fact, the Canadian mills are setting up, or have been, right now, considering the lumber prices are as low as they are, but when the lumber prices were a lot higher, they were shutting down production in the British Columbia area and setting up production down in the southern part of the United States. Mills, even if they're Canadian mills, if they're operating in the United States, they don't pay tariffs, right? That's only on imported stuff. Texas has about 63 million acres of forest and woodlands, which is about 38% of the state lands area. Yeah, I'm not, the fiber, which that's what they generally refer to it as, is the fiber of the trees, before it's milled into something or created into anything. The access to fiber is not a concern. Like, the United States cuts far more trees down than we actually consume here. We send most of, I wouldn't say most of them, but we send a fair amount of it out of this country. It's a huge agricultural product. We send raw logs over to Asian nations all the time. It's a huge exported market. The Columbia River right here with these freighters, there was times before they used to put the logs into the hull of the freighter. They actually sat up on top of the deck, and you would see them constantly floating out of the river. Now you rarely ever see the logs sitting on the freighters because they're now buried down in the hull. trying to spur domestic production with words. Southern softwood is the result of government intervention back in the 70s and 80s forest farmland. Yeah, I kind of wondered about that, you know, because like you see some of these plantations down there, all of a sudden they just have this massive amounts of them, and the property owners, the landowners, aren't getting the price for the logs that they thought that they were going to, like the projection of it, right? Because there's such an abundance of it. So somehow, somewhere, somebody back in the day, right, decided to push that idea down there in that particular region to say, hey, you all need to be planting these trees to get ready for this huge demand for lumber that's going to be, you know, happening in the next few decades. And so a lot of them did. Well, now it's time to harvest, and there's such a plentiful amount of them that these people are no longer getting the price that they want for, or what they thought they were going to get for the logs. Even when the lumber prices move way up, there's such an abundance of logs that the log prices stay low, right? And this is something that I don't know if a lot of people kind of relate to. They look at lumber prices and they say, well, if lumber prices are up, then log prices should go up too, because that's what you make lumber from. But they don't take into consideration that logs are a huge exported market, and unless the foreigners are buying them up, there's going to be an abundance of them, which means you're not going to get the price that you're looking for. All right. Simon, why is it that Mexico primarily uses cinder blocks to build homes and they don't need lumber? It's because that's the way that they had done it. Like, I mean, if you have the availability of a particular building material that is going to make it the most efficient, then that's what you're going to end up using, right? Like here in the Pacific Northwest, it's all over the place. Like, it is by far the most efficient way of doing it. If you're going to be building out of concrete, you got to have concrete facilities around. Well, I can build a house up in the middle of the woods, and I can deliver every piece of that house up to the middle of the woods using this here little S10 pickup truck. Maybe aside from some of the beams, but I get a lumber rack on it, and I could probably do that too. But if you're going to be building out of concrete, you need concrete facility. You need somebody who's going to deliver you concrete. Yeah, you can mix it and do it all yourself, but then you're going to have access to water and all the other things. With a handful of nails and a saw, I don't need power. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that it would be fun, but you can do the same thing with concrete, but not quite the same way, right? Lumber is by far the most efficient for our area. It's the most plentiful, it's the easiest to distribute, it's the most common practice, and if it was anything that was more efficient than that, we would be doing it. That's all there is to it. All right. How can we hold our government accountable? You can't. The only way you can hold your government accountable is for you individually to make that decision for yourself, to hold them under your thumb. And that means you don't participate in their actions, because that gives them power. The more you exit out of the system, the more you start moving into gold and silver, Bitcoin to a lesser extent, you start getting away from the third-party claims. You start getting away from the ability, you know, the business practices that pay taxes, right? Which I know is kind of difficult for a lot of people to internalize, but to figure out a way that you can get the things you need without actually doing it, like through the traditional methods of setting up a business and all this other stuff. When you start exiting out of the system in such fashions, that takes the power away from them, right? The only reason why they have power is because we're industrious, and we had been industrious in the past. They can't take power over people who are not industrious. I mean, you got a bunch of people sitting around not doing anything. There's no power to have. Or it's like, hey, guys, go to work, make stuff, give me the ability to then, you know, tax you and stuff like that. The people have to be industrious first. Like, they have to rise in power and ability, and then people can then come in and govern that. So it's, you know, you got to think it's the people themselves that are creating the situation for other people to come in and then try and inflict the power on them. But they couldn't do it. Those people with power, the government, all that other stuff, they couldn't do anything at all if it wasn't for the fact that we were rising first. We have to rise as a people first, then they can try to take power over it. We have control over that. We can say, hey, we are not going to take our efforts and allow you to exploit them in such fashions. We don't know how to do that as a people because we have conditioned ourselves to live this way. But as an individual person, you can figure it out. You can figure out your way to exit out of that system. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be scary. It's going to be very unknown territory to go into. And if everybody did it consistently and at the same, like, together, I just don't see how the government could operate. They would simply be out of business. Now, is that something you really want? Well, you got to have something to govern, right? I mean, it's got to be governed by somebody. Otherwise, we'll be out there murdering each other, right? I mean, this is the whole idea behind governance, is that, people can't behave. And so you have to have somebody come in there and make sure that the people behave. How is that? Like, what does that look like? Well, it looks like what we got. So how do you figure out a system in which that you can govern yourself? Well, you got to figure out a way to exit them out of your life, to make it so that they're just completely irrelevant. Now, this is where I think things like smart contracts and cryptocurrencies could actually be a benefit. Most people look at it as government intrusion, the all spying eye on you, tax trace, do all that other stuff. Okay, well, that's the way some people look at it, but I look at it in a different fashion, saying smart contracts can literally eliminate the need for lawyers and courts and all these laws and all kinds of stuff. But I don't know how many people look at it as a benefit. They're most likely to probably look at it as a burden. So can you get government to behave? Absolutely not. You can't get them out of your life, and you can't get them to behave. But you individually can do something about it. All right, we vote for those that rack up debts. Okay. Holding government accountable is like holding a woman accountable. Good luck. Yeah, absolutely, Wayne. And that's where I'm saying, it was just like, it's almost impossible to do something like that. You're going to have to take it on for yourself in a way that says, I'm going to be in a position in which that they don't interfere with my life. I mean, they can make those laws, they can do the tax, they can do all that stuff, and it impacts me very little. Most people have conditioned themselves in such a way because they don't know any better or different, right? I mean, it's just the way we grew up. We're a victim of our upbringing, And so they, get a job, they get the taxes, they get the, government assistance, whatever it is that's happening. And then they realize all of a sudden it's just like government has so much involvement in their life that they couldn't possibly see it any other way than to have them involved in their life. And that, in fact, if you tried to exit out of their life, it would somehow deteriorate them because they don't have government involved with them. This is the way a lot of people feel. And if that's the feeling you have, you're living in a fear-based consciousness, which is easily controlled and manipulated. And that's the reason why we now have the government and the experience here that we do. People weren't feared. They were like, it was just like, hey, we're going to take your Social Security away. And the people were like, I don't care. It was like, take it away. Right? And then they would be like, oh, we can't use it as a power leverage over you? Dang, now what? Right? But no, they got this, this thing that they can now manipulate and control your anxiety and fear in the future of what's going on by simply stating whether or not you're going to get it or not get it, or how much you're going to get or not get, or, vote for this person and they'll give you more, they'll vote for that person and they'll take it away. And this is now controlling you. Well, if you just took that whole big ball of wax of Social Security and says, put it on the shelf and say, okay, go ahead, whatever you guys think, I don't care. Whether I get it or not doesn't mean anything to me. You guys want to bitch about it, you guys want to complain about it, you want to use it as a leverage and fear tactic, thing, whatever. There it is, sitting right there on the shelf. I'm going to be over here trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life, right? And if I come back and it's still there and you guys have provided me with the ability to now use my Social Security benefits to do whatever it is that I want without the manipulation tactic involved with it, then great. I'm glad it's there. Until then, I don't care, right? Because I'm not going to have that dangled out in front of me saying, you better vote for me or vote for that or whatever, so that you don't lose this. And I'm like, you know what? How about I just don't have it, right? How about I just set it right over there? I call it an old people tax, and if I get it, I get it, and if I don't, I don't. And then now you guys can go ahead and bitch and complain about it all you want, because it doesn't impact me anymore, right? It doesn't impact my life. Now, again, some people say, no, make it impact your life. Make sure that you pay attention. This is yours. You deserve it. This is something that you work for. They shouldn't take it from you like that. And I'm thinking, that's exactly what they want you to do. They want you to have that sort of mindset over it so they can control you. I'm not going to do it, right? Period. Right? I'll set it right there on the shelf. There it is, right? If you want to give it to me later on in life, cool. If not, then I didn't expect it anyway. All right. time is it? Oh, I got to go back to work. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out. I think this idea about the tariffs needs to be really understood in a much, not in an assumption manner that a lot of people are taking right now, since it's nothing more than a credible threat, right? Because nothing has happened. You gotta remember that nothing has happened, but yet the fear-based, anxiety-ridden people out there are believing that it's going to be far more profound in their life than I think that than it's going to be, right? I mean, you just look at the evidence from the past, and you can see back then nobody cared. So why is it all of a sudden people are going to care now? It's because it's being blasted all over the news and somehow going to end up destroying their life, right? Once you get rid of that part of it and you look at it for what it really is, not so scary anymore, right? And all these people who are losing their minds over it, they're probably not making really good decisions, right? Because it's all fear-based decision-making that they're doing instead of logical-based understanding the facts, right? I mean, just go back and look. It was just like, just in August, there was a 14% tariff put on lumber and nobody cared. Like, I mean, I remember people talking about it. They wanted to blame Biden for it, right? Even though it was really just a carrying on of the Trump administration. And here it is, going to happen again, and people are losing their minds, but yet they have no actual evidence of it actually doing anything to impact their lives in a profound way. Right. Okay. There's no point in rooting for the death of a nation with nothing to replace it. Mad Max thing. Yeah. Social Security beneficiaries should be offered a buyout cash out. You bet your life. Yeah, I mean, shit, I would take it. I'd take it right now. I'd dump it all into Bitcoin. That was so funny. I had a bunch of people kind of get mad about me saying EU fears the boss. Well, not really. He's not here today, and I have 6 more minutes before I need to go back. But I had a few people. Most people didn't care. Most people know my stance on Bitcoin and that I'm a buyer of Bitcoin, but I have very little expectations of it. And so as people generally are a buyer of Bitcoin, they have an elevated expectation of it. I'm very different inside of that, as saying, yeah, I'm a buyer of Bitcoin, but I have almost no expectations of it. And so when I called them magic beans yesterday, people got very mad, right? They didn't like that idea at all. Even though really, if you think about the story of magic beans coming from Jack and the Beanstalk, what ended up happening is that he dumped this money that he was supposed to get. He went and sold this cow, traded this cow eventually for some magic beans, and then his mom saw the magic beans and was like, what the hell are these? Tossed the magic beans out the window, and then it gave him the opportunity to go up and steal a bunch of gold, right? Now we think about this story, and there's probably a lot of symbolism that's going on with it, because he comes back with that gold and he lives this wonderful life. Jack does, right? So here, his mom, right, the family, everybody around him says, man, you made the stupidest decision in the world by buying these magic beans. She tosses the magic beans, but it creates an opportunity for Jack to go up and acquire all the wealth that he could ever possibly imagine, but he knows that he stole it. He knows he stole it. That's why he feels all guilt-ridden about it. Right? He had this wonderful life from it. He went and he got the gold coins. He got this chicken that laid golden eggs. He had this golden harp. You think about it. He had food, conveniences, and pleasures of life. He stole it with that Bitcoin. I'm sorry, magic beans. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.